wartime, young men and women are sent to the front lines to fight for their country. Nowadays, no person under the age of 17 can enlist in the U.S. Army, but in the past, people significantly younger have served by lying about their age or due to the government being more relaxed with their age restrictions. Today, I'll be telling the story of the youngest soldier to fight for the United States in major American wars. The American Revolution. Richard Lloyd Jones. Richard Lloyd Jones was born on the 15th of March, 1767, in Colchester, Connecticut. In 1777, shortly after turning 10 years old, Jones enlisted as a fifer in the 3rd Connecticut Regiment. Fifers were tasked with playing their fife, an instrument similar to the piccolo, during battle to signal line changes, changes in tactics, and other important messages. Jones also played during marches to ensure soldiers marched in the correct formation. Unfortunately, due to the lack of records during Jones's lifetime, little is known of his time during or after the war. It is known that Jones had at least 4 daughters in adulthood and died in 1852 in Indiana. His original tombstone read, "A musician in the Army of the Revolution," but after a new tombstone was erected for Jones, it was changed to 10-year-old fifer. War of 1812. David Faragut. David Faragut, born James Faragut, was the son of a Spanish-born seaman who served in the Revolution and a Scottish-Irish homemaker. He was born near Knoxville, Tennessee, and moved to New Orleans as a child. At the age of 7, Farragut's mother died, and his father sent Faragut to live with David Porter, a U.S. naval officer who Farragut's father had served with in the Revolution. It was at this point that Faragut changed his name from James to David in honor of his new foster father. By the age of 9, Faragut was a seaman serving under his foster father. During the War of 1812, he took part in the capture of the HMS Alert, and by the age of 11, had become a prize master and was tasked with bringing a captured ship, the Essex, to safety, a mission which saw him wounded in a skirmish near Chile. He would later fight pirates in the West Indies and serve in the Mexican-American War as well as the Civil War. Faragut remained on active naval duty until 1870, where he would pass away from a heart attack while on vacation in New Hampshire. He is buried in New York City. The American Civil War. Edward Black. Edward Black was born May 30th, 1853, likely in Indianapolis. Black enlisted in July 1861 as a drummer boy, aged only 8 years old. Drummers had been a crucial part of warfare up to this point, as they would signal line changes and march patterns for soldiers, but this meant enemies would often aim for drummer boys in order to cause disorganization in the opposing army. In 1862, President Lincoln discontinued the use of drummer boys in the Union Army, as too many young boys enlisted as drummer boys were being killed on the battlefield. Black returned home to Indiana, but re-enlisted shortly afterward, this time with his father. In August 1862, Black was captured during the Battle of Baton Rouge, but was released once Union forces took the city. He was discharged after his release, but enlisted for the 3rd time in February 1863 and served in the 1st Indiana Heavy Artillery Division until 1866. Despite surviving the war, Black suffered a significant amount of trauma, both mentally and physically, which would ultimately kill him in 1872. Edward Black was just 19 when he died and is buried in Indianapolis. The drum he played during his first stint in the Union Army is now on display in the Children's Museum of Indianapolis. World War I. Ernest L Renmore Jr. Ernest L Renmore Jr. was born in 1904, most likely in Framingham, Ohio. On the morning of September 28, 1917, Renmore Jr. left his home for school like any other day, but did not return home. His family searched night and day, but found no trace of him. This is because instead of going to school that day, Renmore Jr. walked to his nearest enlistment office and joined the U.S. Army. Aged just 12, Ernest Renmore Jr. was 5'6" and about 150 pounds, so he easily fooled recruiters into believing he was 18. His family would have no info on his whereabouts for a full 8 months before Renmore Jr. would finally send a letter confirming his whereabouts. Renmore Jr. was assigned to the position of runner and would regularly have to avoid gunfire, poisonous gas, and more as he delivered messages between regiments. Due to his quick feet and agility, Renmore Jr. avoided injury until 1918, when he would take a barrage of bullets to the chest. In a stroke of pure luck, however, the gas mask Renmore Jr. carried around his neck blocked the bullets, and he escaped unscathed. Unfortunately, Renmore Jr.'s gas mask was completely destroyed in the incident, and before he could procure a new one, he fell victim to a gas attack and fell unconscious. He would later wake up in a field hospital, shaken but safe, before said hospital fell under attack, and the recovering Renmore Jr. would be showered in shrapnel. After his recovery, Renmore Jr. returned to the front lines, where he would eventually fall victim to another gas attack. This one would render one of his lungs useless, an injury that would plague him for the rest of his life. He was finally discharged at the age of 14. He returned home, and although little is known of his life after World War I, it is known that at the beginning of World War II, Ernest Renmore Jr. was residing in California and would leave his job at Electrolux Corporation to join the U.S. Air Force. Most sources say he was overjoyed at the opportunity to serve his country again. Renmore Jr. would later serve in Korea as well, before returning home for good and eventually passing away in 1983, aged 79 due to pneumonia. His multiple exposures to poisonous gas played a role in his eventual death. He is buried in Section 65 of Arlington National Cemetery. World War II. Calvin Graham. Calvin Graham was born on April 3, 1930, in Canton, Texas. At the age of 12, his father died and his mother remarried, so unhappy with his current living situation, he altered his birth certificate and joined the U.S. Navy in 1942. Graham completed boot camp in August 1942 and was deployed to the USS South Dakota in Oahu, Hawaii. Graham first saw action at the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands, which technically ended in a Japanese victory, but Japan suffered significantly more casualties in the battle. During the naval battle of Guadalcanal, Graham was wounded by a piece of shrapnel, but continued to help his wounded comrades before seeking medical attention himself. For this act, he was awarded a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star. In December 1942, the SS South Dakota was sent stateside for repairs, and Graham made an unauthorized trip to Texas for his grandmother's funeral. After his superiors discovered this, as well as his real age, he was imprisoned in a military prison for 3 months, before his sister managed to negotiate his release. Graham attempted to return to his ship, but was turned away, and his medals were revoked. Graham then spent some time working as a welder in a shipyard before marrying at 14 and becoming a father at 15. By 17, he was divorced and enlisted in the Marine Corps, but was sent home after breaking his back in Korea. Graham would spend a large part of his life fighting for medical benefits and proper recognition. Finally, in 1978, the Navy honorably discharged him, and his medals, apart from his Purple Heart, were returned. He also received some medical compensation. Graham passed away aged 62 in 1992 in Fort Worth. His Purple Heart was awarded to his widow just 2 years later. Korean War. Gilbert Zamora. Gilbert Zamora of Los Angeles was born in 1936, and by age 13 stood 6'2" and weighed 195 pounds. Due to his large stature, Zamora was able to enlist in the 40th Infantry Division of the California National Guard by claiming he was 17 and having a friend forge his parents' signature. Zamora would spend 13 months on active duty, but as troops began mobilizing to be shipped off to Korea, Zamora's mother wrote his higher-ups, and Zamora was honorably discharged. Zamora returned to school, but re-enlisted at 17, just in time to see active duty in Korea. Zamora saw action at Old Baldy, Alligator Jaws, and Pork Chop Hill. He would later fight in Vietnam, where he would sustain a gunshot wound. Gilbert Zamora retired from the military in 1988, aged 52, and Zamora passed away in 2011, aged 75, and is buried in Arlington National Cemetery. Vietnam War. Dan Bullock. The most tragic story on this list is without a doubt that of Dan Bullock. Dan Bullock was born December 21st, 1953, in Goldsboro, North Carolina. At the age of 12, Bullock's mother died, and he moved to Brooklyn to live with his father and stepmother. At age 14, Bullock altered his birth certificate and joined the U.S. Marine Corps. Bullock had always stated that his dream was to become a Marine, a pilot, or a police officer, so it is believed he enlisted to follow that dream, and because joining the Marine Corps was his easiest route to receiving an education. Bullock struggled in boot camp, but with the help of his fellow soldiers, he graduated in 1968 and was shipped to South Vietnam less than 6 months later and stationed in Phi Phu. On the evening of June 7, 1969, Bullock and 2 other Marines were occupying a bunker near the airstrip when a Viet Cong soldier threw a satchel charge in the bunker, killing all 3 men. Dan Bullock was just 15 years old. Originally, Bullock was assigned to cleaning duty, but was moved to the bunker after another Marine was wounded, meaning his death was nearly avoided. After Bullock was buried, he was not given a veterans marker due to him lying about his age. A veterans marker was finally placed on his grave in 2000. In recent years, stricter checks of new recruits has almost entirely stopped underage people from serving in the U.S. Army, but the young boys who fought and died for the fight for freedom ought to be honored.